Thrivers, we have got an incredible show because we're going to be speaking about gynecology with the one and only Dr. Sumayya Ebrahim. I trust you Thrivers are thriving despite this incredible storm that everybody's in, and not just surviving, because there's so much to be grateful even in this season. So welcome to the show, Dr. Sumayya Ebrahim.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here today.
Now, Dr. Sumayya is the wife of Dr. Riaz Motara that we interviewed, and thank you so much for the incredible feedback and questions we got on functional cardiology. And we're going to take a bit of a story and a narrative, and my personal story is that after having my son so easily, the first month we went to a contraception, we fell pregnant with my son Marco, and then we had a 10-year battle of infertility and just an incredible procedure called IVF, in vitro fertilization, and we've got our miracle daughter Zoe, who's 5. And I want to walk through a story and a narrative about natural medicine, holistic medicine, using other tools, other modalities to keep and sustain people's health over time. My daughter's 5 years old. Give us a little bit of a backstory of your children and your life and your practice and where you studied, and what moved you to use other techniques, alternative complementary techniques that have helped so many patients. And we've shared patients over the years, and they've just come back with the most incredible testimonies of a doctor who listens, a doctor who makes you feel heard, a doctor that has other techniques and tools and looks at you holistically. And so I've been blown away by yourself and Riaz in terms of just the way you've treated patients and how they feel when they come from your room. So welcome to the show, and give us a quick backstory.
Wow, thank you. That's really lovely to be acknowledged. Thank you. So my story is a little bit, Riaz and I met at medical school. We were in the same class and we got married a week after graduation. And we went into the system of being interns and surviving and then becoming medical officers, and then we both decided we wanted to specialize. So I ended up in gynecology and Riaz in cardiology. And I started a private practice at Park Lane Clinic. And part of the reason I started there is I had this whole career mapped out in what I planned to do in state hospital and possibly get to professorship, etc. But as life happens, it doesn't work that way. And I couldn't fall pregnant.
Oh, wow.
So a couple of tries, and a year after I tried, I couldn't fall pregnant, and then I decided, like many people do, let's stuff it. I'm forgetting about it. I'm going to focus on the practice. So I started the private practice, and 4 months into it, boom, I was pregnant.
Wow. Without
a thought. And I can tell you so many stories like that. When people take their minds off it, they fall pregnant. And so started the practice and had the first baby, and boom, 8 months later I was pregnant again with number 2, and you'd think I'd know better, but here I was, and we had 2 children. And then the practice grew, and it was beautiful in those days. We were doing assisted births, midwife run, low risk obstetrics. I was the backup gynae. We were working at a place called Linkwood, which is still in existence today, and backing up midwives. So that was lovely while it lasted. I loved it, but it took everything out of me. So there were nights when I used to leave home, go and do a delivery, and boom, there I had to come back to my own children for feeding. But nevertheless, I was burnt out after 10 years.
Okay.
And so then I had to make a decision in terms of changing tack.
Yes.
And then changing and stopping the obstetrics. It took everything out of me.
So you were literally burnt out. I just want to draw a little bit deeper down there. You had this incredible practice, you had 2 children, but you were just running so hard, and then you just decided, I need to make a change.
Absolutely. And then what was the change? So the change is I reconfigured my life.
Okay.
I got myself back to myself and got healthy again, started sleeping again, started having a bit of a regular routine, and changed, and I stopped the obstetrics. So now I do women's health.
Yes.
So everything that is early pregnancy related and non-pregnancy related.
Okay.
And I think that's where my focus is today. So for me, I was always looking for something more. So what is that extra factor that determines how healthy we are as women?
Good.
And it's not only about the medicine, it's not only about the surgery.
Yes.
If we take a few steps back, what will determine how we live, how healthy we are going forward. And so I started asking questions. And I'm very lucky, I'm married to a man who's very progressive in his thinking. And together with some other colleagues who were actually in our class, we started learning about other avenues and alternative methods, and I'm still learning.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's the beauty of life, I guess.
Fantastic, what a great story. Two incredible children, it sounds like, and self-actualized learning and varsity and Matric and beautiful clinic that you've got here. So let's go through a process now. I've got a 5-year-old daughter. What would you say to parents that come in and say, I want to ensure that there's good women's health and fertility is at its best? How would you take that step now if we were in your office and we wanted to ensure that our kids, but also especially my daughter, has good health and high fertility?
So first, I think the foundation of health is starting early, right? So what you put in is what you're going to ultimately get out at the end of the day. So starting early from what you put into your body and what you put on your body, right? So obviously what you're putting into your body is your nutrition, first and foremost, what you're eating, how you're eating, healthy eating, clean eating, stopping preservatives, sugar, all the addictive substances that are lovely to have but are really no good for us. So keeping nutrition clean, cultivating good habits around food and eating and attitudes towards food, avoiding things like overemphasizing issues that could trigger off later on, issues around anorexia, the problems we have in high socioeconomic cultures, which is my practice. So things like that. So putting what's into your body, also what's on your body. What do we use as our cosmetics? What do we use as our soaps? Where are we getting extra estrogen from, xenoestrogens? We're looking at the explosion of breast cancers today. We're looking at the explosion of endometriosis. We're looking at all the estrogen dominant states, which are creating infertility issues for males specifically. Where are we getting all this estrogen, right? There's a lot of xenoestrogens in our environment coming from plastics, how we store food, what we've got in our cosmetics, and all those things need to be looked at early on. And if we don't know about it, and we find out downstream at age 30, 35, we can't get pregnant because of, it becomes a little bit late. So it's actually better to start having these conversations and teaching our kids early on about clean living, conscious living actually.
Good. Let's work and pull on that string of nutrition first. So sugar, I know, has been causes endocrine disruption in the body. Your seed oils, your vegetable oils are significantly now being shown to cause major disease, and that your omega-6 to omega-3 ratios are changing now. I know I spoke to Dr. Motara about this, and the ratios are supposed to be 3:1, 3 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. The ratios that we see in our practices is 20, 30:1. So those seed oils are a problem. What are the other nutritional things that we need to be aware of with our kids? Obviously we want to limit those processed, and you said those colorants and flavorants and that. But what's important that they should be eating at least to help with their fertility and with women's health specifically?
I think it's also not only what they should be eating, but what they shouldn't be eating. So what should they be eating? I think lots of plant-based foods, whole foods, nuts and seeds. So things that are rich in calcium. Because remember, girls and boys are making bone. The bone that you make from the age of 13 to early 20s is what sticks with you forever, right? So it's your basic foundation. So, and your bone, you don't only need it to carry babies, etc. You need it forever. So you're building all of that at that stage in your life. So fertility, what should you be eating? Nuts and seeds and non-inflammatory foods, right? So things like avocados, things like walnuts, omega-3 rich food. Your meat products, your dairy products should be omega-3 rich, as opposed to grain-fed. So grain-fed is omega-6 rich. We know we eat too much of omega-6.
Yes.
So we've got to look for those. So where does it come from? It's grass-fed.
Yes.
So we've got to read labels. We have to read labels, because you think, oh, beautiful grain-fed eggs, but grain, yes, so it's organic, it's not antibiotics, but it's fed with grain. So what we're eating in the animal gets transferred into our bodies. It's quite interesting that the traditions, we live in Africa, right? But traditional cultures sometimes kept young girls away from a certain age. They weren't allowed to eat meat.
Sure.
Right, so they only had to eat a plant-based diet, and these were the years sort of towards reproduction, because certainly there was an instinctive, maybe a learned experience about the value of not doing that in terms of fertility, future health. So it's almost going back to basics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And also what we feed our minds. So, kids internalize a lot of their parent stuff. And like the anxiety around the parents, what the parents want them to do, expectations around that. And that anxiety constantly puts kids, the pressures of school, into a fight-flight mode, which we know in the long term, if that situation doesn't switch off, it creates chronic inflammation. And what is endometriosis?
Yeah.
What is polycystic ovarian syndrome? What is all of those hinder fertility? And that is related to an inflammatory process that hasn't switched off.
Okay, good. Let's look at that, because I think omega-6, omega-3 is really important, and taking a good source of omega-3 is important, and to have fish in your diet, I think as a pescatarian, that would be really good. Those pescatarians out there, I think it's probably one of the healthiest diets out there. And we're not going to discuss all the diets. Fasting is a very important nutritional tool in my book that I use with my clients, because it gives the GI time to rest. It helps with autophagy and apoptosis and all these important repair and regenerative processes that happen while we sleep and that. But let's look at the top 10 blood tests. I mean, I've discussed this many times with Dr. Golding, I've discussed it with Dr. Motara, discussing it with you. I've got a daughter. We often see thyroid issues coming in early. We start seeing ferritin issues, not enough iron. Kids are anemic, causing a lot of problems, premenstrual problems, menstrual problems, heavy sort of periods, clotting, pain, sugar cravings, bloatedness. When do you think we should start testing, young females to see that at least they've got maybe the top 5 blood tests, doing an HSCRP, an inflammatory sort of marker, a ferritin, a thyroid marker, looking at TSH and having a look at those ranges? We've discussed this again and again on the podcast, that these ranges are so broad, from 0.5 to 3.5. And previously they were not so broad, and these ranges, if someone's sitting at 3.2, we say that's normal or healthy, but it might not be optimal. So what is your view as a gynecologist? Earlier is better. But ferritin, I can see these young girls come in, their ferritin's very, very low. It causes significant problems. What is your view on maybe the top blood tests and when you should start?
Are we talking about girls?
We're talking about girls, and we're kind of focused on women's health, because I think we haven't done many podcasts on how important looking at women's health from an early age, and making sure that when you start that menarche, when you start that process, having your period, there are big signs that the body will tell you if things are dysfunctional or not.
Correct. So I think it's so important. Young girls, they have the worst diets. So especially at that age where the period starts. Yeah. So, like 8, 9, 10, and often iron deficiency anemia is quite rampant in that age group. Then the period starts. And then every time they have a period, they get a setback in terms of how much iron they lose. So they kind of never sort of keep pace with the iron loss versus the iron intake. And here's the paradox. When you are iron deficient, your periods are going to be heavier. Yeah. And when they're heavier, you become more iron deficient, and then you just loop in a circle. So definitely, I think if we are going to test sort of a prepubescent girl who's maybe seeing a GP or who's seeing her functional medicine doctor, I think ferritin, iron, is a good one to test. Bearing in mind that sometimes you can't always get an idea from just a full blood count, because there are certain ethnic groups in our country especially in my practice, who may have thalassemia minor,
Yes.
and then that skews unless you don't look harder at the actual iron levels and the ratios. So you've got to be aware of that. So ferritin, definitely. I think vitamin D essential.
Yeah.
It's essential, especially going forward for their bone protection and their generalized immunity and their mood, because vitamin D has also been linked to low vitamin D to depression. So I think those are all the two are important. And then possibly if there is a weight issue or slight overweight or excess weight, maybe fasting insulin, fasting glucose, because I see a lot of polycystic ovarian syndrome in my practice on girls who don't have the typical phenotypic PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome sort of body type just by looking at them. But then they show up and then their periods are dysregulated, they don't exist, and then they have the issues around the hair and sometimes the anxiety and the depression that goes together with that, the low vitamin D. And then we make a diagnosis, obviously, but without the basic or the typical phenotypic type of polycystic ovarian.
So vitamin B, vitamin D, ferritin.
Not vitamin B so much. I'd say we could look at that, vitamin B12, because that's the only one you can really test for. Vitamin B12, vitamin D, ferritin, fasting glucose, fasting insulin. You can do the Homer index if you like. And then depending on what else is going on. So depending on the symptoms, but I'd have to say possibly those would be your tops. Then you can throw in thyroid, TSH.
What about the HSCRP, because inflammation is so rampant now?
That we can do that too. So that would fit in. Then you can take it even more one step further into homocysteine.
Yes.
Right, especially when you're now moving towards the fertility aspect, because your homocysteine under 6 would actually be better. And then I think as it starts moving into the teenage years, it becomes a little tricky because testosterone, DHEA, I think we are seeing a lot of adrenal fatigue, and so it depends based on the symptoms whether or not you're going to measure cortisol, DHEA, and then your estrogen, progesterone, prolactin. We measure those in the situation where the period has disappeared. So if we're dealing with a situation of amenorrhea or oligoamenorrhea where they're getting their periods but it's scanty. So again, that call gets based on what's showing up at the time from a symptom perspective.
And from a women's health, this omega-6 to omega-3 test that myself and Dr. Motara have been using for a long time, or since it came out last year, and the oils as well. How important is that for young children whose diet often is filled with, fructose corn syrup, canola oils, safflower oils, sunflower oils? These are huge. They stay within your cell membranes and the endocrine disruptors. How important is that to do that test?
Look, I think it's super important if parents are aware and if people are interested in this, because it informs your choices going forward. So if you already know there's an issue at a younger age, you're more likely to take action and sort out the diet, sort out the balance of food, start teaching your kid healthy habits so that you can improve that ratio. So I think a lot of people are not even aware that this kind of thing exists and that these tests can be done. So I think maybe it's also important to bring that to your audience, to say, listen, these tests can be done, and I'm sure you have, and it should be done.
Great, and we don't want to look at sort of functional medicine, specialties. I mean, a lot of people we had a good chuckle about the functional medicine gynecologist, but you do in your practice and just the way you think and treat patients holistically, and rather look at what blood markers or what are the essential fatty acids that you might be missing. So tell us a little bit about going to the root cause before. The incredible part of Western medicine is fantastic. It saved millions of lives, and some people are anti-Western medicine or anti-complementary. I say use the best out of both worlds, and they both have their places. But you do look at the root cause of people and their symptoms. How important is that for the patient out there or the person listening, saying, I go to the doctor, I get a script, but I don't think there's enough investigation with regards to what's causing these ongoing symptoms, what's causing my insomnia, what's causing irregular periods, what's causing the pain that I have to suffer with, or what's causing the acne, and how can we look at it from a holistic point of view? So how important is that?
I think it's the most important thing, because you have to understand the downstream symptom. The symptom just doesn't occur in isolation. The symptom is there as a result. It's your body showing you that something's not okay, right? But where is the something? The something starts off further down the line, right? So to identify what the something is. Now, what are we all here for? What are you and I here for? It's healing. We're in the business. We're not only in the business, but we help people to heal. What is healing? It's transformation, right? So sometimes a symptom shows up because your body needs to heal in a certain way. And it's not only the physical healing, it's also what happens here in our minds that will inform our process of healing. So to go back all the way to say, okay, when did this show up? How long have I had this? And what could it mean that I've got this? Let's go back. Let's talk about what happened. And often patients will tell you, my period stopped when my mother died.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So loss and grief. Or people will say, my period did this when I had this major stress in my life. And so we go back there. And the trick is also at the psychological level to find out what hasn't been processed there that has triggered the change. I mean, we know that the body we sit with today is not the same body we had 7 years ago.
No.
Right. You've renewed all your cells. Our bodies are amazing. It has the process of apoptosis, which is programmed cell death.
Yeah.
It has an immune system.
Yeah.
It has a system that will renew. But what makes it so that every cell that comes down the line ends up, if somebody has a disease, in that disease state? What's the trigger? Now we know, and we're starting to learn that triggers can be many things. It could be toxins. It could be an emotional reaction to something that has happened. It could be something we're not eating, so perhaps a deficiency. It could be so many environmental things that all of these things can affect. It could be epigenetic factors. All of these things can affect. So the thing is, where are we going? What created the problem in the first place? And how can we sort of sort that out, and how can we heal from that so that the outcome is different, so that we no longer have painful periods, so that how do we live with this polycystic ovarian syndrome? We may have it, we may label ourselves with it, but if we make significant lifetime choices, we can live fulfilled, happy lives with having many babies, and it has no impact. But the interventions have to be introduced along the way.
And interventions early, the assessments done early. I think early is better, like you've said. So we look at nutrition. I think a lot of people might know about nutrition. The second thing that I want to sort of look at, and I think it's crucially important, but I'd love to hear from gynecologists, how important are all these topical substances we're putting on? I mean, the person out there might be thinking, I use traditional Head and Shoulders, and there's nothing against Head and Shoulders, and I don't want to pick a brand, but how important are all these chemicals we're putting on in the soaps, and are they really these xenoestrogens and drinking out of plastic bottles the whole time? How important is that for women's health?
Very important.
Okay.
The estimate in the cosmetic industry is that the average woman, adult woman, will put an average of 8 products on her body. Right, and count it. Shampoo, conditioner, moisturizer, cream, soap, right? So these are all external products that you're putting on yours, and your skin absorbs, right? So you swallow, you gargle, you use feminine hygiene products, right? All these things go into your body. Lipstick, every time you lick your lips, I'm wearing lipstick now, every time I lick my lips, I'm ingesting whatever's in there, right? So it's super important to be aware of what's in your cosmetics. So things like parabens, things like xenoestrogens, and there are websites today where you can type in your cream or your product, even the brand, and it will tell you the ingredient list, and you can learn more and more about this if you choose to do it, and make a choice about what you're going to put on your body and into your body. Because xenoestrogens are harmful estrogens that act like estrogens, and they have estrogen effects on the body. And what does extra estrogen in the body do? Number one, it increases our risk of developing breast estrogen-dependent tumors. So for example, breast cancer is an estrogen-dependent tumor. To a certain degree, malignant melanoma is, but not as much as breast cancer. Other things that are important from a woman's health perspective is endometriosis, gets worse in a high estrogen state. Fertility, obviously, as a result of infertility, as a result of that. The presence of fibroids, which is the commonest benign gynecological growth we see in uteruses, and that can cause huge issues with regards to bleeding, infertility, etc. And it's one of the leading causes of having to do a hysterectomy,
Sure.
I think, in this country. So I think there are many benefits to not putting extra estrogen in your body. We get estrogen from plastics, as you said. We get estrogen from water. And we cannot filter out the estrogen in the water, even if we use filters in our homes, etc. I mean, it's in the water. Where does it come from? From the plastics of the pollutants in the environment, and from the fact that women take contraceptive pills, so we pee out estrogen, right? So all of the stuff is in the water. And we can't control for all of this, but we can control how much we expose ourselves. And it's also not about going nuts. I mean, we can have guilt and say, oh my God, you know, why is there any reason to get up in the morning if this is what I'm doing to my body? But it's being aware. And instead of maybe using 8 products, use fewer products, and look at the ingredient list. Make sure it's clean. Make sure you know what you're putting on your body. Consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's so. We've got diet, and then we've got these what you're putting on your body, all the cosmetics. I think that's important. I think the message is loud and clear. Getting these xenoestrogens into you is not a good idea, especially if you're a woman. Starting early as you develop your sort of gynecological health is probably crucial, you know, when you're in your teens and that, because I'm sure you get a lot of development from, you know, your normal estrogen, and then all these extra xenoestrogens cause a lot of disruption, cause imbalances between your estrogen, progesterone, your estrogen dominance, those type of things. So it's crucially important, isn't it, for young girls to be well aware of this, and for their mothers to model this. I mean, if you're going to be putting on 10, you know, products as a mother and then expect your 13 or 14-year-old not to put any on these, I think it's going to be quite difficult for the family unit.
Exactly, absolutely. You know, girls today are having their period a lot earlier. And
now, why is that?
Multiple reasons, right? One, girls are bigger because they have, in our environment, in Western, let's go with Western environments, right? So in Western environments, we have more food. It's plentiful. There's no sort of lack of anything. So we eat more, the girls are bigger, the nutrition's better. So that's the one aspect. Second aspect is the hormones in the food, the milk, the meat, the environment, right? So that all leads to earlier production and earlier onset of menarche. And this is so interesting. I used to do a talk for schools, for dads, about the changes in their daughters with a mate of mine, Dave Lipschitz, who's he's a psychologist, and he used to talk about the aspect of how absent fathers, when dads are absent, not necessarily in a divorced single parent home, but also physically absent or emotionally unavailable to their children, it links to an earlier onset of a period, and there's a higher rate of teenage pregnancy in the household. How interesting is that? So see that where the emotional component comes in as well, in terms of early onset of a menstrual cycle.
And looking at the mind, we had Dr. Caroline Leaf on the podcast, and you know, cleaning up your mental rest is your latest book, and how important it is. You can go 3 weeks without food, you can go 3 days without water, you can go 3 minutes without oxygen, but you cannot go 3 seconds without thinking. And that was one of those sort of initial pages in the book. And how important is the mind, you think, in terms of women's health? And I mean, these young adolescent females are going through depression, they're going through anxiety. The latest stats now, I think 1 in 3 Americans has been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder in the last year. There's significant problems in terms of just dealing with the pandemic, and obviously our situation in South Africa has been voted the 2nd most stressful country to live in the world by Bloomberg. How important is the mind for female and women's health?
The mind controls everything that shows up in the body. It's linked, okay? So, and the body doesn't know the difference between an imagined experience conjured up by the mind and a real experience. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so if you imagine eating a lemon right? And you really conjure up
Yeah.
that imagination.
Good example.
You can start tasting, you start salivating in your mouth, right? And sometimes you can even taste the lemon, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a true, you're not eating the lemon, but your imagination is creating a reaction in the body, which then shows up as something physiological. Now, the stress response, the anxiety response, how we respond to our environment is all happening up here, and then it shows up in the body. So I'll give you an example. I have a lot of my practice, I have a lot of young girls. So their moms, some of the girls I've even delivered, so they come back to me as patients for the first time, then I know I'm in the business for too long. But they have chronic dysmenorrhea or chronic pelvic pain, right? So I do a lot of laparoscopies for chronic pelvic pain. We look for endometriosis, and we treat endometriosis, and a lot of the time I don't find anything. So we do a laparoscopy for chronic pelvic pain, and we find nothing. And we know that the patient has come through the system via the gastroenterologist, been labeled with IBS, because that's a pain thing, comes to me because of painful periods, and then is there endometriosis? And then we go back and we start talking about the history and what's going on, and then we learn about the anxiety, the type A personality. So I think what happens is the thinking patterns that we develop from childhood becomes our default operating system.
Yes.
And when we go to this default operating system, we stay in those loops, which then creates a physiological reaction within the body and heightens our sensitivity to pain. Right, and so everything hurts. Right, and that's just the short, easy version. There's multiple pathways in which we can plug into. But something that's so interesting that I learned from a colleague of ours, Dr. Manga, is how the breath and the diaphragm, for me, links to the pelvic diaphragm. And this, when I learned this, I'm going to share it with you because it was such a game changer for me. It was, so what happens is, let me show you something. Make a fist with your hand. Right, what did you do when you made the fist? With your breath?
I hold my breath,
Right, so now close your eyes, okay? Make the fist and breathe. And as you take the breaths, lengthen your exhale and move the breath through your fist. Now, what does your fist want to do?
Open.
Right. So what happens is, when we are invested in our social media and our WhatsApps and our emails, and as young people do today, and you know some WhatsApps are worse than others, right? You see that WhatsApp and immediately you stop breathing, like, oh my God, there's that WhatsApp again, that person, right? Or that email. So what happens is we do this kind of thing, right? We hold, or we shallow breathe, and then what happens? We lock our diaphragms. Now, because it's all linked with the fascia, right, which are your connective tissue connections to, amongst all your body, your internal organs, your pelvic organs, your pelvic diaphragm. The pelvic diaphragm, because of the fascial connections, mirror the diaphragmatic diaphragm.
Yes.
Right. So if you're locking this, you're locking that. And what happens? The entire diaphragm and the pelvic muscles tense up, contract, including cutting off the blood supply, and not cutting it off in the sense of making it go away completely, but impeding it.
Correct.
And also affecting the nerves and creating pain syndrome. Right. So now it's so important that just by breathing or changing the way we breathe, we can unlock the tension in this diaphragm, which unlocks the tension in the pelvic diaphragm.
And there we go. And we'll link to that with Dr. Manga, because I think it was incredible, episode on breathwork, how important it is, and you've now linked it to the gynecological system, which just shows you how important it is for women's health as well.
And it's amazing, and I say to the teenagers, your breath is your secret weapon. Use it. It's with you all the time. It costs nothing. It doesn't do anything. It's always there with you. The only time it's gone is when you're dead, and then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. And we were just about to interview James Nestor, who wrote a book called Breath, and he's been on many podcasts.
Oh, he's my favorite.
Yeah, we were going to have him tonight. He had to go to Los Angeles, but he talks about 90% of people do not breathe correctly, 50 to 60% are mouth breathers. And he got a lot of his work from Patrick McEwen, who we've had on the podcast twice before. He's got a book called Breathing Cure and The Oxygen Advantage, and how important it is to do the basics right, like breathing through your nose.
Absolutely.
And looking at resonating breathing, 5.5 to 6 breaths, in and out, about 5.5 breaths per minute, and how important it is, and how it affects the vagus nerve and improves vagal tone. You're talking about the nerves, and how important that counterbalance is with the parasympathetic nervous system. So, we've got a breathing coach at Made to Thrive, and people think it's, they don't think it's real science, but there's a lot of real science to this. And
absolutely.
How important it is for health. So, possibly my 5-year-old, and this is something, and she goes to school, and they say, when she gets into a little bit of an overwhelmed state, take a big deep breath, and she's like, with her mouth and shoulders up like this, and not breathing with the diaphragm, not breathing with the ribs. And I'm teaching her now to breathe through her nose and breathe slowly through her nose, and doing the Teacup Test. We put a teacup on her stomach at night, and she breathes in through her nose, and she pushes that teacup slowly out and back in. And so I think those are important for our children, yes, male and female, but especially our women that battle with anxiety, that struggle with depression. I mean, suicide rates have dramatically increased, and it seems like it's more on the female aspect with regards to those conditions. Am I right?
Absolutely. Well, look, I think what's the figure? 90% of the world's antidepressants are consumed by women over the age of 45.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Right, so
Wow.
that's a shocking statistic.
Yeah.
It may be different now because younger women,
Yes.
younger people are now, the depression and anxiety rates are going up in the younger population. But this is the stats that that I grew up with. No, not so long ago. I mean, in the last 5 years of my practice.
Sure.
So clearly, that women are not feeling that the expectations for their lives are being met. So why? Where's the disconnect? And who knows? I think maybe we need to reevaluate. COVID has brought up many things for us to reevaluate what success looks like.
Correct. And also those beliefs, those programs that you were talking about, that thinking, that it runs 95%, those automated beliefs. We had Dr. Bruce Lipton from the Biology of Belief on the show, and he speaks about only 5% is conscious, 95% is subconscious. They are automated programs that are running. Now, how do we develop those programs? Firstly, from watching our parents, our family units, how we interact, what we assume, what we think, how we engage.
And conditioning.
Conditioning.
Yeah. And then we learn something because we get exposed to it, and then we strengthen that pathway over and over and over. So it's practice that gets the pathway stronger. And how do we break it? And I always say to my patients, how do you break the pathway?
Yes.
You have to be aware that it exists in the first place.
Yeah.
And when you know it, you can aware of it. Okay, where do I want to go? Do I want to go down that same path, or do I want to make a new pathway? And whatever you don't whatever you don't give attention to will disappear, and whatever you give attention to will grow stronger. So, and then make a new pathway. And it's the same with health. Exactly the same with health.
So now my little daughter comes in. She's just beautiful as Zoe, and she comes into to your rooms now. What are the most important, and we can go spiritual here because we often speak of how important the spiritual and how important your soul is. What do you think the most important beliefs are to establish that she believes, that can be those automated programs that she can then filter and resist if a teacher says you are not pretty, or you are unworthy, or that picture's not good enough, and the significance and success that you were talking about. What would you like to establish in, let's talk 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds throughout South Africa? What are those belief programs that are crucially important?
Wow. So I think that, and I can speak from personal experience, is one of the major beliefs in my life, and I think that most people will have this, is that I'm not good enough. And often I feel that girls and boys, everybody should be be aware that they are good enough. May I realize I am always enough.
Yeah, that's right.
As I am right here. And then life becomes a game.
Yeah.
Because then whatever you do is a bonus.
Yeah.
And I also think that the meaning you give your life, and I always say, and I say to my kids often, your meaning of your life or your quality of your life will be determined by the meaning you give it. So always find the meaning in your life. Because if you can't find the meaning in your life, then it's almost like, what's the purpose of being here? I might as well not be here.
Yeah, it's true.
And only you can give meaning to your own life. And that's where the parents come in, because kids don't know.
Yeah.
So you, by modeling and by how we live our lives, hopefully we are examples to our children to say, okay, wow, this is how she gives meaning to her life. And this is the quality of her life. Either I would like to have the same, or hell no, I'm not going down that road. So even the other way is good enough, because kids can realize what they don't want from a parent that's giving them an example that they don't really want. So there's no right or wrong. I don't believe there's any right or wrong. It just is. And it's what the person does with it. So I think, there's a lot of talk on raising adaptable, resilient children who are going to be, we don't even know what's going to be thrown at them, right? In this life that they're going to lead. I don't think we even know what's coming. Elon Musk's Neuralink, and we're talking race. I think the next, can you imagine when we're talking human and non-human, or human and augmented human, when we're looking at those dichotomies and those challenges. So I don't even think we know what's coming for our kids. And that's the world they're going to be dealing with. So I think if they go back to the basics, and they remember their basics. What am I putting into my body? What am I putting onto my body? What am I feeding my mind? What meaning am I giving to my life? All of those, I am good enough. And those are the basic tenets. And they lead from that. I think that's a good starting point.
I want to double click on meaning, because at Matrix Thrive we cannot stand and tolerate this TGIF, thank God it's Friday, and we've got an acronym TGIM, thank God it's Monday. And it talks about reversing this, the weekends are pleasurable and work and school is bad, and it's not pleasurable at all, and holidays are good, but when you have to go back to work, it's a real problem. Because if you've got meaning, like you've said, then you wake up on a Monday morning, just like you do, just like Riaz has. You wake up knowing that you can influence and impact people and really change and transform them, and that's very meaningful and purposeful. And so possibly meaning and purpose is one of those algorithms or one of those automated programs that we want to instill in our children, that they have a unique purpose, they have a unique meaning to bring to this world. They've got a unique thumbprint that no one else can bring. And so that they change this, this acronym from TGIF, which I hear again and again and again, and it undermines, 5/7 of their life,
we spend a lot of our culture and a lot of our time waiting to get somewhere. I'm waiting for the holiday. I'm waiting for the weekend. I will do it when I'm more relaxed. But I often say to my children, you're living your life right here, right now. This is your life. So if you can't love what you're doing right now, you can't be waiting for the next thing, because then you're always waiting. And your life bypasses you completely.
That's true.
Do it. Do it now. Feel it. Feel the pleasure and the joy and the sadness and all the things. I think a big thing that is also to allow children to name the emotion, recognize the emotion, and allow it to move through them. Because I think when we deny our emotions, when we don't want to go there because we think it's a bad emotion, I shouldn't be having it. We don't allow that to move through the body, and then I think that at an energetic level it gets stuck.
It's true. So let's go back now to maybe someone who's got a child, a young female, maybe 14 or 14 to 25, who's really struggling with severe painful periods or irregular periods. They're not sure what to do. They've been to the gynecologist, they've been to their medical doctor, they're still struggling. What do you say to the person out there? What should they do?
So look, we always start with a full evaluation. So history taking, we listen to the story, when did it start? I mean, there's certain pointers. So we can have painful periods that are associated with lifestyle, and aggravated by lifestyle, or we could have painful periods that are secondary to an organic pathology or something that we're going to find that we may need to treat. So often we have to go back and say, again, go back, find the history, discuss the issue around nutrition, do an examination to make sure that there's nothing wrong. So we often do an ultrasound, or we may need to take it further if we find something, to do an MRI and see, get a diagnosis. Right. So sometimes if there's no diagnosis forthcoming, it gets labeled as primary dysmenorrhea. So primary, it's in the absence of pathology. And so that will inform our treatment going forward. So then we look at, okay, what am I doing every day? What am I eating? How am I showing up to life? How am I managing my breathing, my anxiety? Exactly all the things we spoke about. And then we sometimes use nutrition in terms of certain supplements, like we spoke about omegas. We use ginger, so ginger tea a lot during the period. That improves the period pain. We use exercise. So exercise, as you know, regular exercise, 35-40 minutes a week, up to even 60 minutes, not a week, 3 times a week, will up the endorphin levels, which what's endorphins? Our body's natural morphine, which gives us a better experience of our period. And then we also look at all those things that we discussed. What's happening here with the anxiety level, how we're managing it, what's going on in our lives, how we're managing schoolwork. And then we look at, okay, do we need something more? So sometimes we say, right, all these strategies will take some time, but sometimes we need an acute relief. So sometimes we do use analgesia, painkillers to get through a difficult period, so that all the other things, before the other things have had a chance to kick in. And then we sometimes use, in addition to that, sometimes we use hormonal manipulation, depending on what's showing up in the person's profile and in the person's history. And sometimes surgery, if we think that there's a reason to have surgery.
You spoke about supplements as well, and maybe herbal things. I know Christian in Wolfstrap, she speaks about using things like Agnus castus and Vitex and these other products and Dongguai. What do you think about those herbal,
So, my experience is, it's not really my area of expertise. I think that if in a person who asks me, I will point them in the right direction to an expert who is more versed in this, and if they want to try, and I will give them the option. So I can say to them, from my training and my expertise, I can offer you this, but there's also this other route. If you feel you need to exploit, you can, and these are the people that are experts in the field. So, and then everybody has to make their own decision. So as you know, because you're professional, that some things will resonate more with some people and less with others.
Absolutely.
And so people have got to feel their own way around what method they choose to sort of heal whatever they're going through.
Let's talk a little about and give me your perspective on, there's a lot of research now on electromagnetic radiation. Cell phones in the pocket have been shown to decrease sperm quality, morphology, motility. How important is for women's health in terms of taking these Bluetooth devices, radiation off them? I know there's over 10,000 studies that have been done on, we're in this electromagnetic soup, switch off the Wi-Fi. I'm qualified geobiologist, registered as an magnetic radiation mitigation specialist. It's a handful. But how important is that from your perspective with regards to radiation?
Look, I think that anything that could potentially impact cellular behavior and cellular dynamics, we need to be aware of. And we don't have, Western medical science hasn't really said, everyone's poo-pooed the idea that electromagnetic radiation, 5G radiation, etc. is harmful. Everyone has said it isn't harmful, but there are studies to show that we need to be more cautious of these things. So I often advise, and my kids also advise my kids, don't sleep with the phone next to you. Put it away. It doesn't need to be next to your bed. Even I have to keep my phone sometimes close because it's on call for emergencies. But even that, it's the furthest it can be, so I can not, if I need to hear it ring, I can hear it ring. But it's turn it down. The blue light's not so great for you. If you have to be on a device There are special glasses that you
Yes.
can use to filter out the kind of light that you get exposed to, which can affect your sleep and which can affect your melatonin production and the rest, your inflammatory cascade, etc., etc. So I think parents who are navigating their children through this, it's important for parents to understand that because we don't know enough, be cautious.
Yeah.
You know, it's not carte blanche. Make certain rules in the house. Kids do thrive on rules, even though they don't say that they do and they hate the rules. But the rules actually help, and it's for their protection and also educating them on why. So the buy-in is more.
Yeah, that's important. Last two questions before we wrap up, and thank you so much, is at Made to Thrive, we've got 8 consultants online. We all health coaches and health consultants, and we like to walk a journey with patients because we find that medical doctors or specialists are really busy. Their rates are often extremely high, which, you know, they work for that and they beat university and they've got a lot of experience, and that's the system. But there's a lot of people that can't afford to keep on going to a psychologist or keep on going to a medical doctor or keep on going to a specialist. Where does the role of health coaching in terms of helping people maintain their transformation fit in?
So you see, when I sit with a patient, right, I have got half an hour, an hour with that patient. And a lot of it, I don't have the time, even though I have the ideas, but I haven't got the time to sit with them for 20 minutes and say, listen, this is how you're going to breathe. This is how I can't coach them through a breathing session. I can't say to them, bring me all your supplements. Let's check what you're doing. This is the doses. Because it takes time.
Of course.
Right. And as much as I'd like to, it's not feasible. So it's a complementary add-on to what I do. So, for example, like I can always say, look, somebody needs to navigate you, somebody needs to be in touch with you, emailing you, or sending you information twice a week, checking on you, holding you accountable to any treatment program you're doing, making sure you're exercising, making sure you're getting out of bed, all of that kind of thing, because we know, and somebody you trust. Because if you don't trust your caregiver, it doesn't matter what your caregiver tells you or your health coach tells you, you're not going to do it, right? Because you're going to think, whatever. But if you invested in that person, and that person obviously is invested in you in whatever way, monetary or emotionally or process of exchange, which I believe in, then you're more likely to follow through. So I think the benefit of health coaching comes in as a valuable add-on to somebody to take them further through that journey and hold their hand in the way that the doctor can't, because the doctor is just there for that hour or the surgery or the stuff that requires medical intervention.
And they're growing and they've got expertise to do the endoscopic surgery that they need to do. The health coach can't do that. So the doctor who specializes, who's got that unique value add or that purpose, needs to be doing that work as best as they can.
Exactly. Like I went to do the mindfulness training program, and I spent 2 years doing it, and part of it was to design a program that I could use within my own practice. And when I sat down and did it, and I thought, actually, you know what? I can't do it all.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I can focus on what I'm good at, what I've built my practice at in 25 years to do, which is provide the gynecological side. I love the mindfulness side. I'm doing it for my own development, and I understand it now better, but I'm happy to hand it over to somebody else because it's too much.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's ask you the last question now. If someone's listening, and whether they're 55 and they might be going through menopause, or they are 15 and they've got significant problems with their woman's health and their periods, what are the top 3 things that they can action today that is the most important? Because people, battle, there's just overwhelm. What can they do now, from the health coaching to the nutrition to the mind to, we haven't even spoken about community. I mean, the importance of community. The sociologists tell us now that if you've got an obese friend, you're 40% more likely to become obese.
Wow.
Your friends that do not know that friend have a 20% increased chance of becoming obese. And their friends have a 5% chance of becoming obese. The network effect of the community and the group you surround yourself is crucially important to your health and your lifestyle and your habits.
Absolutely.
And maybe we can do that in another year's time when we've got a lot more learning and we can chat about how important community is and women gathering together in a group and the group dynamic and doing team coaching and group work with your medical practitioner. But give us your top 3. What can people do straight away?
Okay. So I think the most important thing is to create the space first for yourself to understand what your problems are, if you have any problems. How do you create the space? You be still. You switch off everything.
Yes.
The social media,
Yes.
the distraction, the news, all the stuff, and you really pay attention to what's going on in here yourself. So top 3, be still, pause.
Beautiful. Be still and pause,
Pause. You cannot find out anything about yourself if you're stuck in the busyness of life. You're too busy running around. It will never catch you. You will never sit and figure.
Just too much noise.
Yeah. Pause and listen. And breathe. And in that, you will find what you need to do.
Beautiful. Well done. Thank you so much. We declare blessing and favor over you and your family. I thank you that you are helping people thrive because your heart and your soul to see people healed and go through the journey of life is incredible. And so thank you. And we honor and we respect you and we validate people like yourself that are not only one-dimensional in their thinking, they're open to many ideas, although they might be exclusive specialists in an area, they've got a broad understanding of what it means to be a healer. I always say this, doctor comes from the root docere, Latin, I don't know if you did it, which means teacher. We're here to teach. We're also here to intervene, but we're here to teach as well. So thank you so much. And,
thank you.
I hope you go from strength to strength and been a privilege to have you on the show.
And may you be blessed and may your family be blessed too.
Thank you so much. It's great.